All right. Well, welcoming Stephen Reid to Illuminating Life. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, great to be here.
Stephen, I met very briefly at Borderland Festival two or three summers ago now. And yeah, I would call you probably the closest thing to my Metamodern doppelganger in the sense of I just see a lot of myself in you in terms of Stephen has this incredible email that gets sent out once a month or something like that, and it just has all these resources, and he's mapping all these books that he's reading and all these teachers and all these events and workshops that he's going to, and all these events and workshops that his friends are putting on. And yeah, so I really feel like you're a brilliant community weaver and mapper of the liminal web space and all the ideas that are really lighting me up as a human. And you also put on gatherings, in-person gatherings called Futurecraft Residencies, and they look really amazing. I unfortunately have not gotten to go to one yet, but potentially this spring. And the gatherings are they seem like they're swimming in the similar territory to the constructing consciousness gatherings that I've been doing the past 2 years, as well as the Boulder Lighthouse Collective that I have here in town. So we thought we would come on and just record a podcast and just sort of spitball our insights and our learnings and our failures and our successes, and hopefully it can be of help to those who are listening.
Sounds good to me. And just to say, I feel extremely flattered, honored that you would you think of me as something of a doppelganger, Taka, because yeah, I see the fantastic work that you're doing, the integrity with which you're doing it, and all of your amazing like metamodern cartographical efforts. So yeah, happy to be here with a kindred spirit.
Cool. Awesome. Would you like to just give a brief overview of anything I might have missed in terms of projects that are really lighting you up these days, or things that you're working on that you would love for people to check out or know about?
Yeah, sure. So the main things I'm working on at the moment, I just taught a course on technological metamodernism and received some funding to turn the course notes into a book. So I'm just getting started on that. I'm the lead developer of a platform called Dandelion, which is quite popular in the UK for a certain flavor of event that we might call, yeah, metamodern, regenerative, participatory, holistic. Yeah, but if you, it's kind of as we frequently find in this space, it's quite hard to find like one succinct term to say what it is that we're talking about, but like if you see it. So yeah, Dandelion is a bit of a hub for a certain kind of event in the UK. So Futurecraft we mentioned. Also, I'm a trained coach, so yeah, I love to work one-on-one with people on their hopes and their dreams. So I think that yeah, that covers most of what I'm currently up to.
Cool. And you're calling in from Stockholm right now. It looks like, have you seen the Drake music video where he's in a box? It kind of looks
Oh
like
yeah,
you're
yeah,
in the
yeah.
in the Drake music video.
Right.
So you're
Yes, I'm calling from Stockholm. This has been my home since the beginning of the year, this year, more or less, when I moved to be with my partner, Laura, who you also met at that Borderland, and you guys also had a very beautiful connection. And
yeah.
she says hi, actually. I just said, oh, I'm just going to record a podcast with Tucker. So
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, like one thing that actually really moves me, and it's in part because I'm really calling this in, is to be able to create gatherings and community containers with a romantic partner. And that's not a experience that I've been able to have yet. So I'm calling that in. If maybe anyone listening to this podcast
yeah.
wants to create gatherings and date me at the same time, how about that? Um,
It sounds
how is that?
like wow,
How is
what
that?
an offer! What an offer! I hope you've set aside plenty of time to go through like the hundreds of emails that are now
Yes,
going to
yes,
arrive.
yes. May it be so. How has that been? This is jumping right in, but yeah, what is it like to create community containers and facilitate and co-hold spaces with a romantic partner?
So yeah, so the context here is that Laura is one of like kind of four co-facilitators, well, including me and her, on the Futurecraft residencies and retreats. Yeah, it's the first time for me that I've been holding space in that way with a partner. And I mean, happy to report it's been pretty seamless for us in terms of, I think, being able to transfer what's best about our relationship and the different ways in which we complement each other in that. into a kind of facilitation setting. That is to say, I'm more comfortable bringing the high energy and the drive and the kind of clear intention and this and then and in a kind of if we're talking topics, then yeah, very comfortable and interested in having conversations about metamodernism and metacrisis and technology and so on. And Laura brings the just the slowness and the care and the relational sensitivity. She actually has a PhD in relational sensitivity, and yeah, so I think we all feel that in the spaces that she's in and helping to help hold. So yeah, lots of good things to say about that. I think that the one thing which maybe we didn't expect is that for like whilst we're facilitating, then the relationship almost sort of goes on pause. So like we're kind of like less intimate, and of course that's just appropriate in a professional sense, like you know, in whilst during the days or whilst others are around. But when the so yeah, something goes on pause, and then when the retreat ends, it's like, okay, we can we can like yeah be partners again in the way that we're more used to. So yeah, the ongoing experiment in a way. I'm sure there's more to learn.
Yeah, very cool.
And similarly, Tucker. So what is appealing to you about the idea of doing this work with a partner?
Yeah, well, actually, this is maybe a good step back. Is a lot of the projects like Constructing Consciousness or the Boulder Lighthouse Group, they are both whole projects in themselves that I'm, very much been passionate about on their own. But I also see them, I contextualize them as I sometimes refer to as a brick in the cathedral of a larger vision that is unfolding. And maybe it's unfolding collectively, certainly, and it may be way beyond my lifetime. But what I hope is to raise a family in, say the next 5, 10 years in a regenerative metamodern lighthouse or a community that is a land-based project that's also networked, globally with other sister projects that are sharing a similar base set of principles and values and like ways of orienting to life, but each have their unique identity structure, you could say, their the unique individuality that are contextual to that place and the people that are organizing them. And so, in order to live and potentially help start and run one of these communities, I couldn't imagine a scenario where my partner is not also invested in the project. It doesn't seem practically possible. And I would really want that. I would really want someone who's really there to like, yeah, offer that feminine polarity and just bring a different energy and a different personality structure. And there's like more of a wholeness that is able to hold that vision. And yeah, I also feel like as a documentary film director and like I'm quite good at like the practical implementation and the logistics and the, getting shit done and the, reaching out to people and then I love to like one of my favorite things about these gatherings is when people come into the room and there's, high energy and maybe a little bit of nerves and I can just sort of step back and feel like, okay, I did my job. And now the rest is sort of up to the emergent beauty of the collective, genius, as well as some of the facilitators that are more actively shaping the space. And yeah, I would just love to have a partner that is really integral to that process and recognizing that I'm sure that will come with its own, incredible complex relational dynamics that we'll have to navigate. But that feels maybe in my naivete, that feels as juicy and exciting as it does daunting and and challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there is something just about yeah that masculine feminine polarity which can be quite like settling for people, and it does feel uh, uh, yeah, it's obviously like a feature of Futurecraft Residencies that people know or come to know that me and Laura are in partnership, and so I mean I haven't spoken to it so or asked that many participants like, oh, how was that for you? And maybe I will next
Mm.
time because I'd be curious. But my sense is that it's been appreciated so far. Um, And yeah, of course, for when you have dreams as big and wonderful as yours, Tucker, of actually kind of like living in some kind of like regenerative metamodern lighthouse community, it's a necessity almost to find someone that is shares a large part of that at least. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious if you could maybe just give a brief overview of the Futurecraft projects and what happens there and who they're attracting. And I know there's a couple different versions of them, how many you've run. Yeah,
Mm.
just a brief overview.
Yeah. So we've run three so far. We've run two Futurecraft residencies and one Futurecraft together. So the Futurecraft residencies were more of a kind of journey where we're holding people by the hand a little bit more and taking through a series of activities. And the people that were attending those are generally like a little bit newer to this space. Futurecraft together was something more participatory, more co-created for people that are already quite familiar with, the process of co-creation and at least have, some interest or expertise in some of the kind of content that is often being discussed in this world. Um, and so next year we're going to do at least one more Futurecraft residency at Fay, this castle just south of Paris in February, and then a Futurecraft together in May. So yeah, just location wise, we've done so far. We've done two in Cornwall in the southwest of the UK and one in Costa Rica at Brave Earth. So next year France and then also Cornwall again. And and just to give a little bit of more background, like it's like two ways of talking about where Futurecraft came from that like meaningful to more meaningful depending on who I'm talking to. So one is that this idea that all the best parts of any conference are always the chats around the coffee machine or the water machine or whatever it is. So it's like, well, obviously, why wouldn't we want to like maximize that and maximize and whilst it's fine to do some kind of more lectures and so on, just maximize the time that we are just in collaboration with one another in our bodies, in our hearts, not just like sitting and in our heads. But another direction that the Futurecrafts come from in a way is from a series of like co-created parties, including like camps at European Burning Man events, Borderland and Nowhere, where there's, in my experience, like very often a very strong participatory element and embodied element and so on. However, that can also involve like a lot of substances and late nights. And so Futurecraft was like, oh, to what extent can we like keep the spirit that you might find at that type of gathering or camp, but do without the late nights and the substances, and yeah, see what wants to unfold. And so so in terms of some participants have like kind of more familiar with like the conference circuit in some way, but have become frustrated with that. Whereas other participants are more familiar with like the party circuit and have become frustrated with that in a very different way, and a kind of like meeting in the format of Futurecraft, where we are waking up at 7:30 to start with yoga and meditation, and kind of things wrap up at 10 p.m. each night for people to get some really quality sleep. So that's like some background on it. And this feels like a great moment if you would care to like outline the two kind of like forms that you've been experimenting with.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that, but I just don't want to forget because one of the things that I'm most uh, inspired and intrigued by your project and just you as a human, excuse me, is the weaving of different cultural nodes that I experience. And so, like Burning Man and festivals, I think you also go to Medicine Festival in the UK, which is more
Mhm.
indigenous oriented, sort of the regenerative community space. The like Robert Bea soul making world. I think that you're
Mm.
dabbled in the Bill Plotkin universe as well, Vision Quest,
Mhm.
and then like the Hansi Freinart, kind of Swedish Scandinavian metamodernism, and so to me, like these are all like they each have it's like different flavors of ice cream. Like they each just have a unique gift and an offering. And
Mm.
often what I see is when I in America, especially, I think Europe is much more culturally integrated and in the leading edge of of what's emerging. But in America, sometimes I'll go to like an integral conference, or I'll go to a retreat with Pacific Integral, and it feels like it's much more homogeneous in terms of
Mm,
the culture that's there. And so I go to all these, and then I go to Burning Man, and I go to all these places, and I feel like, wow, there's so much of me that feels really um, at home in this, but then there's these other qualities or characteristics that I don't feel like are being incorporated. And so I just kind of feel like I keep growing these octopus tentacles, and then I'm trying to um, weave more and more in. And there's a risk in that, which is it becomes a little bit of everything and it gets watered down, and it's not.
mhm,
But I think right now it still feels like the synthesizing is serving a purpose, and it's like the nodes are learning from each other by coming into closer intimacy and contact. And um yeah, so it's really inspiring to see how I think you're doing that in your own way. And I really hope that like some of the lineage teachings that feel really important to me, and they have kind of a timeless quality to them, can intersect and interpenetrate with the very timely aspects of the cultural ethos that is arising, that we might broadly label as metamodernism, or even like late postmodernism, and some of the
mhm,
beautiful aspects of that genre of existence. So this is a lot of what I think about, like when I'm lying in bed, is just kind of and it's not so much, it is sometimes conceptual, but a lot of the times it's just like closing my eyes, and like images of certain people or certain experiences will arise, and then I'll sometimes see them meeting other people from other experiences just in my imaginal realm, and
mhm.
then I'll just wake up the next morning and message those two people and connect them, and it's like it's so it has a whole shamanic quality to it. Not sure if you can relate
Nice.
to that.
Well, I certainly relate to just well, I take huge joy in that weaving, and I sense that you do also, and also share this instinct for integration between these different worlds and sort of like and communities. Futurecraft is still very much a sort of work in progress and experiment in that regard, because I can certainly relate to this like anxiety in a way of like, oh, are we like, can we fit all of this into like a week? Like, are we just watering everything down in a way which means that none of it's that
Yeah.
effective? And sometimes I contemplate that, but generally I think there's a lot of benefit actually by saying this is a space where that where you can be a burner or a metamodernist or a yogi or an academic, and like and everyone's welcome, and we're going to make it like, but I guess at best Futurecraft is a space of like, oh, it's yeah, obviously you're welcome. It's like there's just this, it's not like we have to do much work in kind of explaining to people why and how all of these different ideas and communities are connected. It's just by being there, and just
Yeah.
by kind of allowing it to unfold in the way that we do. It gives everyone this sense of, oh, I'm home. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, come on, it's time. Let's hear a little bit
Okay.
about the gatherings that you've been hosting.
Yeah, sure. Well, let's see. So exactly 2 years ago this month, I did the first Constructing Consciousness gathering, and those stemmed from the Stages International, which is an ego developmental model that Terry O'Fallon and Kim Barta and Jeff Pitch and many others are um, uh, founded, gosh, I don't know, 20 years ago or so. No, less. Before I knew about it, it
Mm,
started. And basically, they had been doing gatherings prior to COVID. And then after COVID, or it was during COVID, they kind of just didn't really have the organizational capacity and energy to put it on. And so myself and two friends were like, well, we'll do one. And yeah, none of us had ever really done a gathering like that. But we just had this sort of intuitive call that it would be something that would be really exciting for us and hopefully for other people in the community. And this was as COVID was sort of ending, and so there was huge energy and desire in the collective to really come and be back together in person. So I rented an Airbnb in Sedona and like hired a caterer and just kind of figured it all out on the fly. And I think we
mm,
ended up having about 45 people, and there
mm,
were some of the lineage elders that were there, and then a lot of different people from the integral community. There were some Metamodern folks like Joe Lightfoot and Turquoise and Layman Pascal, and then there were folks from the more the Stages universe. And so it was this really beautiful weave, and it happened a few days after an integral conference in Sedona, Arizona. And basically at this gathering, and then for the ones that we did after, we used an open space structure. So the people that were holding the space were really there just to help activate and motivate people to get up and offer something for the collective. So they're not facilitated journeys necessarily. But they are held, and there is a structure, and there are people that are sort of holding the intention of the space and are there to be of support to the group when it feels like it's not finding its way. And what I really love about that is that it does create this weave, and it also is like so much of about it is just, okay, what do I desire? I desire to move my body. Huh. Okay. Well, let me sense into the collective now. I don't know, like a lot of people seem really happy having this conversation, but I'm noticing that maybe energetically there are probably a few people. So I'm going to raise my hand and share like, hey, I'm going to go outside and wrestle in the grass. Who wants to come? And then three people go and the rest stay. And then it's just like this, it's like it has this amazing kind of capacity for people to just sense into what do I desire? What is the collective desire? What is the sort of intuitive knowing of what's right in this context? What would bring more sort of wholeness, or what would bring more like healthy separation and fracturing, that which can also be really interesting, or contrast or disagreement. And it's just like really trusting the kind of transpersonal intelligence that's at play. And by continuously reminding people of that, it helps to just bring that frame or that experience into the foreground of the collective awareness. And then it just meets the funky edges of all the unique personality structures that are there. And it's almost like a pinball machine where it's just bouncing off of like oddities and weirdness and like just like the unpredictable, and shadow comes up. But because there's so much capacity in the room. I mean, some of the absolute best coaches and therapists and healers in the world are there. And so it's like the amount of energy that can be moved without it necessarily falling into like a deep, messy process is pretty awesome, and definitely different from a lot of other spaces where there's perhaps a little bit less of that, like um, just life experience and depth and wisdom that's being held in the field by some of the folks who are there.
Yeah,
So
so
after that, it went really well. And then basically we've done like seven all over the world in the past 2 years. New Zealand and Australia, and two in Canada, and Boulder, and yeah, Hungary. Yeah.
so this sounds more like what we've called Futurecraft together. Yeah, like the more co-creative,
Yeah.
open spacey type of Futurecraft. And it also really resonates with something that we've included a few times, and it's also in the copy for the event at Faye. Something like how we create together will be emphasized as much as what we create.
Mm,
That's really important to me, actually. There's a sense in which it's like I don't care what we do at Futurecraft. It's like
totally.
as long as like how we've kind of collectively come to make that decision, like uh it's not just feels good exactly, but like yeah, I mean hopefully most of the time it feels good to everyone there, but like and certainly like or that we've all learned something from it would be another way
Yeah.
of saying it. um and yeah, but something I was curious about. So you mentioned that the history of the gatherings under that name, at least, they were following some kind of developmental model. Did I hear that correctly?
Well, the constructing consciousness was the name that we came up for the Sedona gathering, because we wanted to differentiate it from the stages gatherings that were happening prior to
Mhm.
COVID. And
Yeah.
I'd actually hadn't been to one of those gatherings, but the two other people that I co-founded CC
Uh-huh.
with had been. And so stages, we it was never it was clear that we were like the core of the collective was from the stages universe, and a lot of people knew each other from different trainings or workshops, or online programs that Stages had offered. And so that was a core weave that brought us together. But we also very intentionally tried to not overemphasize it or constantly talk about the model
Yeah.
because A, I think that's boring and limiting. And B, we were trying to weave in different groups and we wanted them
Mm.
to feel at home and feel a part of the broader group. And so we renamed it CC in part to just totally
Okay, got it.
differentiate it, but also honoring the lineage from which it came from. And
Yeah.
that's a tricky balance. And I think every gathering tried to find a slightly different groove with that.
I, I mentioned that just because something we continue to think about in the context of Futurecraft is the balance between, let's say, having a pedagogy or like a
Hmm.
framework, uh, whilst also really desiring this element of participation and co-creation and emergence, and the ways in which those two things are sometimes in tension.
Yeah.
And so for the gathering, yeah, at Faye in February, we're going to go with this framework of I, we, world, familiar to in some parts of the integral scene at least, um, as a way of giving some kind of structure to the offerings that will
Yeah.
emerge, like mainly from the facilitators actually in this gathering, it being a Futurecraft residency rather than participants, although there will be some opportunities for the participants to make offerings. But yeah, I'm curious how you've kind of whether you sense some kind of like tension there or balancing between just the kind of pure open space and the desire for some frame.
Yeah, well, I think there's sort of two different questions. There's like the pedagogy frame maybe that people either have that is being implicitly held in a collective just because a lot of people share it. Like when you get a bunch of people together and they all speak Spanish, they're more likely to start speaking Spanish. And so when
Mm,
people start speaking in the stages model, stages has three tiers: concrete, subtle, meta-aware. Uh, it could also be concrete, subtle, and causal. And so sometimes that'll be, you know, we'll refer to like, oh, we're doing breath work right now, but we're relating as a new group of humans that are finding their subtle identity. But actually, this is all arising as this beautiful awareness that's aware of itself, having this concrete and subtle experience. And so they'll be kind of pointing out to different ways in which the model can help illuminate what's happening and in a certain vocabulary. But then there's sort of a second question I think I'm hearing, which is whether there wants to be like a theme or a like a specific North Star purpose for the gathering. And to be honest, that's more what I'm interested in these days. But at first, it felt more like constellating souls and then finding what the North Star wants to be or what the gathering theme is that naturally emerges over the course of our time together. And there almost always was. There was almost always a mythopoetic identity, to use Bill Plotkin's
mm.
frame, that just sort of arose from the ground of our connection. And
But
that was beautiful.
you tended not to specify that in advance in any way. You kind of just let that emerge
No,
once the group of people were together in person. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so, like, it's so funny to read the feedback forms. I don't know if you had this experience, but half the people love that and the other half don't love that, you know? And so it's like,
Yeah.
no matter what we do, it almost felt like, it just depends a lot on, I think, where people are coming for. Some are really wanting to be like really actively co-creating and networking and making stuff and doing something that can be an output for the world. And others are like, I literally do that all day, every day. What I want to do is come and relax and,
Mm,
sit back and just have great chats and hang out in the hot tub.
mm. Yeah, I can relate to that, and that's actually one of the reasons why we're experimenting with these two quite different formats, or one which is much more held than the other. You mentioned a second project though, which I think is Boulder Lighthouse Collective, if I've got that correct. So, how does that fit into this picture?
Yeah, so a few months after the first couple of gatherings that I did with Constructing Consciousness, I felt this immense like it was like an awakening into a certain quality of beauty that I was so drawn towards. And the thing that I felt sad about is that I, only concretely had it at least for 4 days, a couple times a year at most. And I was like, I would love to, begin to make this the foundation of a more um, of a more, not permanent, but of a more daily life type of collective. So somebody I met at the first C gathering told me about Boulder, and she introduced me to a couple of her friends that are in Boulder, and then they introduced me to a couple of their friends. And at the time, I was living in Austin, Texas, and within a series of a month, just through this kind of phone tag, I had these 10, 11 friends in Boulder that I just intuitively knew. I was like, I'm definitely going to be friends with them. And so I was like, well, fuck it. I guess I'm moving to Boulder. And a month later, I packed up my car and I moved and I created a Signal group and I invited these people into the group. Some of them knew each other, some of them didn't know each other. And then a few weeks after I got to Boulder, I rented a house in the mountains and we did like a little 4 day in-person gathering. And essentially we just came together to see like, okay, does something want to happen between us? And sure enough, we all fell in love and had a beautiful time together and decided to do, we've done seasonal gatherings. So we have our fifth seasonal gathering coming up in January. And then for a while we were meeting weekly and then bi-weekly. And right now we're taking more spaciousness between our meetings. But I think that was really good to meet in person quite frequently at first because it really built the intimacy and the solidity of the collective. And then now it's able to be a bit more porous and spacious as time goes on.
And so how many people are in that group now?
At the next gathering, I think there'll be eight of us, eight or
Mhm.
nine of us.
And
And
you mentioned that a signal group as well. So yeah, what's the
mhm.
like how many people are sort of being invited to these things at least?
Uh, we haven't added anybody since
I see. Okay.
it started.
Mm.
Since it started, which is pretty amazing. It's like the group that came together, stayed together. A few people
Mhm.
have dropped off over time, and then but the majority, like the core of the group, is still there. And
Mhm.
and we haven't felt the need to add anybody yet because there's just a depth of intimacy that we've traveled together that to bring on
Mhm.
somebody new would quite, yeah, it would really and at the same time it feels like we're ready to do that now. I think there's a
Mhm.
shared desire to kind of bring in new fresh energy and grow it into a new form.
So I'm fascinated by this question of like how kind of intimate groups of people start to kind of grow the container in the most like fair and democratic way, actually. And this is actually why was the initial reason why Dandelion's gatherings feature exists. Dandelion has two quite different parts. It has like an events feature, which is just like Eventbrite or Ticket Tailor, and this gatherings feature, where the kind of the foundational piece actually is this kind of member application system. Um, so Boulder Lighthouse Collective, for example, could create a gathering on Dandelion with the 8 members, and then you could create an application form where anyone else can come along and like apply to be part of the collective, and
Mm,
then all of the existing members can see the application, and they can act as proposers or supporters on the application. Um, and when an application reaches a certain number of proposers and supporters, with at least one proposer, which is usually taken to mean like someone that can really vouch for that individual,
yeah.
then the application is accepted. And the kind of the cherry on top is like uh, uh, the number of proposers and supporters required that number itself can be democratically decided by all of the group members. So if most people in the group are like, well, we really want this thing to grow, like they might kind of the agreed number might be very low. It's just like, oh, someone just needs a single proposer to become in this group. Whereas as a group gets big, people might be like, oh, this is feeling kind of at the limits of what I'm comfortable with. And so then you might need, I don't know, like 80 or 90% of all of the members in the group to kind of be in favor of someone else joining. And it might become much harder to join and the rate of growth might slow a lot.
Yeah.
Um, but I think, yeah, I think this is a really fascinating, like kind of community challenge of how to find this right balance between openness and growth and kind of coziness and intimacy.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, you mentioned on our last call around the idea of source, of being a source of an idea or a project and how that works with you and Futurecraft and the other facilitators. And because that's something that I've really struggled through. When I was in Austin, I wrote this manifesto for the Boulder Lighthouse Collective. It just kind of came through in half an hour. And I sent it to the group before I even got to Boulder, and I asked for feedback, and literally nobody had like any feedback at all. It was just like, fuck yes, let's do this. And but then when it came together, it was like there was some, it was unclear. Is Tucker holding more of a hierarchical power leadership decision making role? Is he's clearly the one that is putting in the time and the energy and activating this from to happen and at all.
Yeah.
But then once we are happening, so to speak, what is it, consensus? Is it sort of and that became quite murky for a number of months, and it really took some time to figure itself out. And I think part of my immaturity was not yet really having the framework of a source, and the idea of like being a source, but then also being able to yeah, like attune to the collective. And I was kind of intuitively trying to figure that out and like find that medium, but without the vocabulary, it felt clunky. And I'm
Yeah.
just curious what your experience with all that has been.
Yeah. Well, kind of linked to what I was saying before. I've always found like the most interesting question, and where the most juicy question is like, what is the process by which new people are added to the group, or who gets to decide that? So I
Yeah.
mean, so I could actually ask you in the case of Boulder Lighthouse right now, like if someone was interested in joining, like would it just be up to you, or is it just, or alternatively, maybe as you kind of said, maybe it's just clear that the group is completely closed right now. But then the question would be, who gets to decide that the group is open in some form to applications? So yeah, how is that working for you right now?
At this point, I imagine that it would be like we have such a beautiful coherence in this moment with the people that are really invested that it would be probably a consensus. But if it was like one person was a little bit, like, oh, I don't really know, and the others were quite, excited about it, I think that would probably trump that one person's hesitation.
Mhm.
And then I think if like the rest of the group was really a full yes to somebody, but I was a clear no, I think that my clear no would probably trump the group's clear yes. And
Okay, interesting. Yeah, yeah,
so,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So I think this is, yeah, like really juicy stuff. And I think my sense is that that is often a really important moment of like evolution and progression for a community to just yeah, have those kind of conversations and define that a little bit more.
yeah.
So my experience of this in the recent years. So I moved from London to Totnes in Devon, one of the kind of like alternative capitals of the UK. Tiny town, like 10,000 people, but in a beautiful location in the southwest. That was 2019, and there's been this kind of running joke involving otters, because we had a group, there was a Facebook group called Find the Others, that some people would said they misread often as like Find the Otters, and so like the otter
Uh,
became the mascot of this group. And so people from Totnes are mostly referred to as Totnesians. I created a WhatsApp group called Tottenesians to keep the otter joke going. And then initially that was very small, because I was actually the only sort of number two of a friendship group that had arrived in that town. But then it was actually kind of thanks to the pandemic that then inspired a
yeah,
lot more people to think about, do I really want to be in a city? And so, yeah, over 2019 or 2020, mostly, like a lot more people from London and Bristol mostly moved to Totnes. And at this point, there are like, I think 70 or 80 people in that WhatsApp group. And indeed, it does use although the main method of communication is WhatsApp, it has an associated dandelion gathering. And so if someone meets someone that they think would be a great fit for this group, they can send them the application link. And then everyone gets to decide whether this person like makes it in. And I think currently like you need 5 people out of like the 70 to like want this person to be in the group. Um, but some people have very different opinions. I know that some people have kind of like voted for needing like 40 people, and
yeah,
um, and it's certainly clear to me like people have vastly different preferences in terms of how fast these things grow, and some people much prefer just something like smaller and cozier. Um, and like, but yeah, and that's what's great. That's why it's great democracy exists, as like
yeah.
at least like the least bad solution to this kind of problem. And so then 20, well, I meant, yeah, at the beginning of this year, I moved to Stockholm. And I found that, well, I really miss Totanesians having that WhatsApp group. And so I thought I would go with the animal theme again. So here in Stockholm, we have a group called Stockholm Starred Up, which means the Stockholm Starlings. And that was just very much inspired by the positive experiences I'd had with the group in the UK. And now that group has like 50 people or so in. And it's only like up until like 2 weeks ago, that was mainly just me and my partner Laura just kind of adding people. But then, yeah, a couple of weeks ago, I said, oh, like now I just want to encourage anyone to propose people for this group. And let's just post about someone that we'd like to add and then wait until they get five like thumbs up emojis
Nice.
on the group itself, which is so it's like it's actually very similar to how the dandelion system works,
Yeah.
with just slightly less complicated. And that seems to be working well as well. And I think this also reminds me of the whole of micro solidarity, which I imagine
Uh-huh.
is a community and like set of ideas that you're familiar with. So
Yeah.
yeah, so like Rich Bartlett and Jocelyn and Natty and all the folks at Micro Solidarity are also really nerdy about this kind of stuff and also thinking hard about like all the different ways in which yeah, you can kind of maintain that intimacy and cohesiveness of groups as they grow. But I think on one level it can sound like kind of inane or sort of just like simplistic compared to like all of the highbrow, like metamodern this and integral that like ideas. And then another level, I'm like, this is actually it. This is like one of the most important things we could all like figure out and like share
Mm,
knowledge about like what works and what doesn't work and so on. But because, or at least it could, because it's my experience at least, that having that group of people, or and that whether it's the eight in Boulder or like 50 in Stockholm right now, like having that group of people that you really feel like got your back and like
yeah.
can, and it's just like this obvious place to post your like successes and your fears and your celebrations and your dinner invitations and whatever can just make such a huge difference to, well,
Yeah.
has made such a huge difference to my well-being that I deeply desire it for everybody. And my
Yeah.
sense is that like it's much rarer nowadays than it should be, and yeah, I think there is like knowledge to be shared about what's possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel safer somehow. I didn't even know I felt unsafe, but some part of my being feels safer just knowing that you exist and you're doing this work in the world. So thank you.
Yeah.
Um, I feel really blessed to live in Boulder because there's several groups like what you're describing where there's a large number of folks and there's, different potlucks and different events. And we just went paintballing the other day. There was a meetup group, which is so much fun, by the way. Putting in a plug for paintballing. But
Mhm.
yeah, I'm curious about these two groups, the one in Totnes and the one here in Stockholm.
Mhm.
What's the cohesion that brings people together? What are the
Mhm.
parameters or the boundaries? Who are the archetypes that are a good fit, and who are the ones that are, how does the culture define itself?
Yeah. Um, the first word that comes to mind is vibes. Like, I mean, like most people
Yeah,
that are in these groups, it's because like some people, or they have spent time with like, a good amount of people that are already in the group.
yeah,
And there's some like just resonance at a kind of soul level, we could say. Even if it's certainly not like exclusively intellectual, it's not like, oh, you need to be familiar with these authors or like these
yeah, yeah.
podcasts or whatever the night before you're um no, it's something beyond that in a way which is kind of related to what we're doing with Futurecraft as well,
Mhm.
which is whilst I'm at the next Futurecraft, for example, I am going to be bringing this content on technological metamodernism. So my co-facilitators are so Anna Ling, who is a yoga teacher and community choir leader in Totnes, and so every day we start with yoga and in the afternoon do group singing. Um, Jay Spencer Keys, who was recently working for a democratic school, a school run by the pupils, and is like fascinated by just the process of participation and co-creation. And then Laura, that I mentioned, that brings some beautiful sessions on dialogue and authentic relating. So, but what is it? that is the bonds the four of us in that context, it's quite difficult to say, like, because
Hmm.
um like Anna is just so beautifully like in her body and with her voice. And I mean, she's absolutely like smart as well, but just like chooses to spend her time in different ways than than like reading as many articles or podcast, listen to as many podcasts as I do, and so on. So,
Yeah.
what is it that is this kind of like sensibility that then that still gives people this sense of like, oh yes, like I want to spend time with you, I want to I want to host retreats with you, and so on. Something that comes to mind is like is we could say like eros in the form of like just like life
Yeah.
force energy. That feels true when I say it. It gives me some tingles actually when I say it. Like and but that is also quite it's like it's one of those things. It's like you know it when you see it, or modern see it. It's like you know it when you feel it. You know when you're in the presence of someone that kind of like lights you up in that
Yeah.
way. But I'd love to hear your take on this, like in the context of the Boulder group, but then yeah, also the constructing consciousness gatherings.
Yeah. Well, with the CC gathering, it's the same way. It's so intuitive, and it's just like okay, so I had this thing called a hot tub test that kind of developed, and I say this kind of tongue in cheek. I know
Yeah,
that
yeah.
but it's basically when I tune into somebody, I'm like, would I want to be in the hot tub with them at 3 in the morning on the second night of the constructing consciousness gathering? Like, would that feel good, or would that kind of feel a little energy draining? Or and that's basically it's that's sort of a metaphor for how I curate the gatherings and my
Mm,
collaborators as well. And we're looking out for things like diversity and pulling people from different streams. And if somebody's really passionate about coming, then we'll definitely really take that into consideration. But at the end of the day, it's just a sense of like, yeah, do I want to be around them at the Thanksgiving table, essentially? If we're creating
mm,
these family
mm,
gatherings that are going to go, really deep and beautiful and intimate, and we're all human, so we know that things are going to arise naturally, so we don't need to add more
mm.
complexity onto just humans coming together in time and space. Then just kind of curating for that vibe check kind of quality
Yeah.
is that's been the main thing. And Boulder, it's a little different because the Boulder group, um, the Boulder group came together in such a sort of miraculous and spontaneous and organic way. And the intention was to keep it pretty small and intimate. Because, for example, at each gathering we do, we have spotlight sessions. And so everyone in
Mm,
the group has an hour to share or offer or bring us into the world and bring themselves into our world. And if we had, 20, 30, 40 people, it just wouldn't be possible to do that. And so the intention was to
mm,
keep that more like a family nucleus.
mm,
And there's already, like I said, other pockets of Boulder that are bringing together more larger groups of people, larger constellations. And and so I had the pleasure of participating in those, but then not having to organize my
mm.
own, it didn't feel like that was needed in this town. It was already existing. Um,
The Boulder
yeah.
group sounds fascinating. It's that like it's that you mentioned the word family there. I think like in the way that a fat you don't choose the members of your family. It almost feels like the members of this Boulder collective haven't. It's not like you haven't exactly chosen each other. It's just like you're just meant to be together. You're just like and you're
Yeah.
almost it feels like you're in a process of just actually discovering like why have been put together almost in a so and it has a different feeling to it from the way you talk about it than yeah the CC gatherings or even some of the communities that I mentioned in Totnes or Stockholm, which makes me very curious. So yeah, looking forward to staying in touch on how that evolves.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't want to, well, each of the four retreats that we've had have been like truly fucking so good, like so perfect. Like I couldn't have possibly asked for them to have gone any better. And everything in between those retreats has had a great deal of rockiness at times and learning. And somebody in the group uses the forming, storming, norming, conform, like whatever that model is. And it really feels like it's matched that in a way. And so, like a family, we have the uncle who gets upset and, leaves for 3 months and no one hears from him and it's confusing. And, so it's not like
Yeah.
it's not like it's all paradise. But I think I attribute a good deal of that to my own immaturity as a community weaver and leader. I didn't go to school for this. No one like taught me how to do this. It's
Mm.
just kind of a thing that I've sort of stepped into, and I feel like Soul has been guiding me. And as I just practice doing this more and more, and kind of come into um, right relationship between like the vision that I feel like is mandated to me by Soul, but then also attuning to not overly attaching to that to the point where it's like bulldozering the collective kind of natural emergence and what wants to happen, and working with the pace that each individual is moving at and not trying to kind of force the speed onto people. That's been like a huge learning for me in the past year.
Mm.
And yeah, I see so much more growth for that as well.
What I'm feeling some curiosity around at this point is um, I'm imagining some folks listening to this and being uh, uh, like if we let's be slightly generous to ourselves. Like, well, Tucker and Steven, they sound like yeah, really like well-intentioned, like talented young guys. Like, why are they wasting their time organizing things for 8 people or even 40 people or whatever? Like, how can gatherings of that scale like have any real kind of impact or significance
Mhm.
at this critical moment in human history? So what arises when you hear something like that?
Fascinating question. Well, first off, I was actually just messaging a friend earlier today and saying that the thing that I'm really excited about is to put on, I'll call it a Metamodern festival for
Hmm.
maybe 150 to 300 people. I don't know if I'd want to do more than 300 for my first go, and to have it at a beautiful retreat center, and to do have there be like keynotes where, instead of them being at a podium talking with a projector, they're in the middle of the room and everyone's in a circle and there's tons of candles and you walk in silence and you get, smudged, and it's like it just has more of a ceremonial feel. And then there's all this like music and arts and dance and play, and everything's kind of happening, yeah, in this one. um it feels more like creating a town. It's like village, like let's create a village that can be a prototype of an actual village that may or may not emerge in our lifetimes, depending on depending on how things go. And yeah, so there's some part of me that is seeing that each of these are just a tiny prototype and a fractal and an experiment for a scaling thing that will happen, and it is happening, and sometimes it's happening through me, but sometimes it's just collective learnings that are going back into their various nodes, and different things are happening in different places.
Mm.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is that the boundaries between what happens at one of these small gatherings is so infinite, infinitely porous, and it's so non-existent in a way. Like when I hear about how somebody's life has been impacted by somebody that they met at a CC gathering, and I only find out about it, 7 months later,
Mm.
but for the last 4 months they've been doing this crazy thing together, and I'm like, how did I not know about this whole time?
Mm.
And so it's um yeah, so I think the whole notion of the question is not taking into account that things are happening in many different dimensions and in many different sort of time and space frames and scales that are quite literally impossible for the human mind to hold all of that. It's like it's
Yeah,
beyond the scope of one person's
yeah.
mind. I want to
But
actually just fire a question to you because I'm forgetting
oh,
what the
yeah.
original question was and I want to get back to it.
Okay. Well, yeah, I was like, I guess it was just like asking, like, what sounds fun, but like, what is the real point or the real
Right, right,
impact
right,
of,
right.
behind doing these things? And so
Yeah.
kind of three things. I heard two things, and then one more thing came to mind. So the first thing I kind of heard you say as well actually you are intending, or there is a desire to do bigger things over time,
Yes,
like a Metamodern festival. So like, yes, it's, it might be eight, or in the context of Futurecraft, like 20, 25, or CC of 40 people now, but like it actually could be 300 tomorrow, and then who knows? So
totally.
that's part of the question. I think the second thing that I think I heard you pointing to, which resonates with me, is like, um, it actually isn't just about numbers, like, and it's also about the depth of connection and the quality of connection, and there can be real impact and utility. We could say much more impact and utility of having like well, it's not just 40, because it's like n minus 1 over 2, like sort of like a more or less n squared, so 40 squared kind of connections of real depth, resulting from a gathering, might
Yeah,
be much more preferable than like, a 4,000 person gathering or conference where like you only speak to a couple of other people, and you go home and think, well, I could have just watched that all on YouTube. So I think that,
exactly.
yeah, I think it's important that like we are able to like push back on the kind of question of number and scale. And then the third thing that came to mind, so it reminds me of some conversations that I was part of in Spiral, actually, if you've heard of these. Like, this is this New Zealand-based network that were kind of thinking about some of these topics long before any of us probably. But that there are quite a lot of people in communities experimenting with this kind of thing at this kind of scale, because in the micro solidarity language we could say like up to congregation scale of like, or Dunbar scale, like up to sort of 150 people. And if those if all of those communities came together, then actually it would be quite a large number of people. And now I did start like something a little bit like this, because as well as the communities I've mentioned in Totnes and Stockholm, I'm also very connected to a crew in Berlin that call themselves the Beehive, with a very
Mm.
similar kind of vibe and size. I think it's probably 60 or 70 people in a Telegram group there as well. And because they were also a creature, then I created a new Telegram group called Creature Communities, where we invited the otters, the starlings, and the bees, like all
Perfect.
to kind of like share like what was working. And at this point, it hasn't really taken off, and I certainly haven't put in much like time and energy into it. And I think that's like a part of a function of that is just like people already have enough groups, and like, or just
Yeah,
it's just like it's just more obvious of like the kind of benefit and fun that you could have by posting in the Beehive group or the Starlings group, rather than this kind of meta group where you are geographically dispersed, especially because a lot of the benefit of the groups comes from them being place-based and being kind of like, everyone being, just like a short
yeah.
bike ride away from someone's house. But I think there is actually something there. Like, if there was, and maybe something for us to continue jamming on now or over the coming weeks, about like, as we hear of more and more people doing things like this, like, would there be interest and utility of actually kind of like connecting one another and almost having a kind of like congress of people that
Yeah.
were attempting to like organize this kind of thing, where obviously it doesn't need to be all 70 people come. You just get one or two kind of representatives of the group,
Totally.
the community building nerds that come along and share their interest. The closest thing that I know of that to that existing right now is micro solidarity. The thing that I found about micro solidarity though is that there's like actually a minority of people that are actually running or involved in the communities. And my experience with the micro solidarity gatherings is that most people that come saying, I don't have anything like this and I would love something like this.
Right.
and
Right.
then they kind of get equipped with some of the skills that might be useful in helping them to do it. But it's also quite hard if you're like the only person in a small town that's like that
Exactly.
like has that kind of like instinct to get something going. So yeah, I think this is very fertile territory at least.
Yeah, I love everything you're saying. And what comes to mind is Gathering of the Tribes, which I assist at in Portugal, which is
Mhm.
bringing together representatives from different regenerative village projects all over the world. And yeah, there was, I think, about 300 people there. And I would say half of them were folks who were looking for a place to connect in with, and the other half were people that were representatives or founders of particular projects, and it was a really good mix in that way. And I was a little bit not disappointed. That's not the right word. I was hoping that it would be a bit more of a networking type event where people are really trading wisdom and more focused on the yeah, skill share and the wisdom share. And it ended up being a lot of drum circles and, skinny dipping in the lake and cacao ceremonies and stuff, which is beautiful, but I'm very lucky to have a lot of that in Boulder. And so the need to like
Yeah.
necessarily do that in Portugal was less enticing for me. And so I'd be curious what it would, and I understand that some of that is important in order to like create that intimacy and those shared moments of depth, but maybe just the ratio felt a little bit off for what I was hoping it would
Mm.
be. So but to bring together just conceptually to kind of take that model of, different folks who are community weavers in their corresponding, conscious communities or the spaces that are on the cultural cutting edge, you could say, and to bring them together to create a new sort of um, collective that is more networked and more intimate and more relational and more at capacity to kind of share and learn and grow from itself as itself, and then to bring that back out in this like beautiful infinity loop of learning. That feels super super exciting and
Yeah.
um, yeah, super
And
juicy.
I mean, and there is a there are ways in which having some resources, including just cash, like would make some of these things easier. Like even for the groups in the place-based groups, just like having some resources available to like hire really nice Airbnbs to do quarterly gatherings or whatever, or at the kind of congress level, or having the resources
Yeah.
then to like pay for people's travel if they're, given that they most of them would be coming from some distance, one presumes, to actually physically be in the same place. Um, having those resources would be really useful. And my sense is that, I guess what the way to think about it would be like, are there ways in which we can, the people, you and I and others involved in these kind of communities can better document their impact?
Mhm.
Like, given that I think there's this like, it's like we or have this intuitive feeling, or there's this like, well, obviously these things are doing a lot of good. If we can actually sort of prove that in a slightly more formal way, then I wonder whether that could be like the key to then unlocking some funding for these kinds of things, which would be part of allowing them to kind of, reach another stage of possibility and maturity and so on. But there are significant positive externalities, is my sense of these things existing that would be
Yeah.
like reasonable to mark in some way.
I'll be right back. I'm just gonna get a book.
Yeah.
So I was just at Traditional Dream Factory in
Ah.
Portugal, and they
Mhm.
brought a bunch of people together for exactly this. They, in one week, I think it was a week, they created this book, and it's basically just a Bible for how, like a universal blueprint for how to create a regenerative village, at least as the wisdom holders were understanding it at that point. And it's
Mm.
super cool because by creating a deadline, by bringing together people that, all had a lot of wisdom and capacity, and then basically creating a mission, which is to create a book that can be published and shared with the broader world, it like generated this immense amount of energy and excitement
Mm.
and people loved it. I talked to the guy that put on the project and he's doing two more and they've all gone really well. So that's one version.
And who is that person?
Uh Mikal, I think his name is
Yes.
Mikal.
I've met him, and he spends most of the time on a boat, if I'm not wrong. And he's about, I think
Yeah.
I get his newsletter, and I think he's about to like sail to the Arctic or Antarctic, I forget which, somewhere cold. And I think that process of like bringing people together to actually to write a book is super exciting, super motivating. So that could be an interesting reason to sort of bring together representatives of various like place-based
Yeah.
communities, which is something a little bit different to but certainly overlapping, but a little bit different to what that book is about, is my sense, because that's
Yeah.
more on the kind of eco village end of things, I would guess.
Yeah, totally. And one thing I appreciate it is just that it's really simple and beautiful and aesthetically pleasing. And, I
Mm,
think that's one of my quirks with the metamodern world in general is, and this isn't a universal statement, but because it's very philosophy heavy, often it can be lacking some of the aesthetics and the beauty and the arts that can really
mm,
animate it and bring it to life in a way that can make it more pleasurable, basically, to
mm,
kind of take in. And so that's
mm.
something that I'd be interested in, is not only creating knowledge, but doing so in a package that can be you know, beautiful and pleasurable to consume.
Yeah, very cool. Like that, the other thing that it makes me think of is, well, is Dandelion again. And so like, to what extent can some of this knowledge be actually put into code? Like and that's, that's part I mentioned the application sort of membership feature of Dandelion gatherings, but that's actually just part of the gatherings feature. Like they also have ways of kind of doing open space style timetables and like rotas. I think that's actually a British English word, but like shifts for like sharing kitchen shifts or like cooking, cleaning shifts and so on.
Yeah,
Um, like collecting payments and sort of indicating who's paid for what stuff. So yes, books and software also. And like, and I
yeah,
actually, I think I heard the last micro solidarity gathering, some work had started on a micro solidarity app with this same kind of flavor, like asking
nice.
to what extent can some of this wisdom actually be put in, yeah, like app form. And that uh so, some people are going to get on better with the book, but and other people are going to get on better with an app,
Totally. Love that.
because the app being like that much more restrictive, it has that sense of like computer says no. It's like the boundaries are more generally kind of more defined, but yeah, sometimes that can be a useful thing.
I think what I would want to do is to film the process and then make a documentary about it.
Mm.
That'd be cool. There's something I wanted to this ask. Hold on one second. I wanted to ask about the project in Sweden that Thomas Bjorkman and others are
Ah.
doing, the
Mm.
Lakefront, I think it's called. And I'm just curious
Mm.
how you're sensing into that project and if that could be a potential meeting ground for some sort of a project like this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very much on my mind actually, because they've kindly agreed to let me celebrate my 39th birthday there tomorrow. So
Cool.
so
Happy
this is the
birthday.
first time. Thank you very much. This is actually sort of uh it's the first time that a lot of starlings are going to be at Lakefront, and like
Nice.
the start of like building a bridge between those communities. Yes, it's a great property with like 50 something like apartments, and then like several large event spaces right by a lake, and also right by a really cozy cafe, like a bus ride from central Stockholm. Um, there's yeah, funded by Thomas Bjorkman, who was behind Emerge and now also the IDGs, and also funded for a time Metamodern, who wrote the books The Listening Society and Nordic Ideology. So yeah, I imagine lots of people listening to this will be familiar with either Thomas or some of the work that Thomas
Yeah.
has helped create. Wrote a book himself actually called, yeah, The World We Create, which is also very good. So, yeah, I have high hopes for Emerge Lakefront, as they're now calling it. Um, it's that one of the reasons for that is the same, or Thomas and his son Alexander and others have already created something called K29. I think that's the right
Uh-huh.
name. Yeah, in the center of Stockholm, which is it's a more kind of like co-living project for kind of tech entrepreneurs and kind of like people in the startup scene. And I've been told by Alexander, it's like they learn a lot through that, and there's a lot of things, mistakes they kind of made there that they're hoping not to make again in the context of Emerge. So this actually isn't their first rodeo in a way. Um, that's promising. What's also promising is that they have this initial group of, I think it's like 5 or 6 people living on site now. which includes some very experienced kind of community organizers and people that have experience like living in eco villages and so on. So
Carl Stayer and Evo
including
Mensch, and yeah,
right,
I
exactly,
love
yeah.
those
So
guys. Yeah.
definitely worth, well, more than keeping an eye on. Come stay,
I
you know,
think I'm gonna come
yourself,
in.
Tucker, and
I'm gonna come in
but
May. Yeah, May. I might do the Futurecraft and then the Integral conference, and then spend the rest of the time at Lakefront.
yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, it might be that Laura and I spend some time there, but you know, we already have an apartment sort of in Stockholm, so it probably feels more like a place that we'll just kind of, you know, visit for events or host events there and so on. And I was delighted. Carl has been the main person I've been in touch with about the event tomorrow, and I've been really touched about how kind of welcoming and encouraging he was for a group that a clearly aligned group to be kind of using the space. And I think there's actually a lot of benefit for Lakefront to connect with other kind of aligned groups in Stockholm. My sense is that it can often become a problem when these kind of projects are too insular. And
Yeah.
it can be very, very important to kind of to be looking out and seeing, or actually like, yeah, in what ways can we be of service to the place that we are in. One project that has always taken that idea very seriously is Tamera in Portugal, that
Yeah.
you're probably familiar with, and like by having this actual, what do they call it, Centre for Global Peace Studies or something like very grand. But you don't, you know, in terms of like being of service to the world, you don't get, you know, don't get much bolder than saying, well, so the service we're in is like world peace. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure Emerge are going to kind of go for anything as big as that straight away. But yeah, my sense is that there is going to be this outward facing element. It's also associated with, well, because it's associated with Thomas, then the gatherings that happen on the island of Irkwadet in the Baltic Sea, just outside of or part of the Stockholm archipelago. And so next week I will be on this island, which is owned by Thomas's foundation, with Carl and Helen, who's also emerged as well. So that also feels useful to like have not just the base in the city, but have this kind of nature-based retreat where
Mm.
at least every few months, folks can get out of the city and just experience like a simpler and wilder way of life for at least a week or two at a
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. The other day I wrote an article that I'll probably publish soon, and it was essentially just a I called it a metamodern vision for a post-liberal world. And it was for a post-liberal America, actually. It was about America specifically. And I didn't write this at the time, but how I made sense of what I wrote just kind of came through. It was kind of like when you're at Burning Man, you know, you're in this big circle essentially, and it's grounded by this desert like that everyone shares. And then there's all these camps, and then there's some villages that connect different camps. And you can basically walk or ride your bike to these different camps that all have their different culture, their different expression, but they're all united by this geographical shared center, as well as principles and whatnot that create a universal kind of governing structure for it. And I was just thinking, you know, like there is a way in which it's important to architecturally shape shift our modern society and create new, you know, villages and stuff like this. But there's also a more subtle way in which we can reframe how we experience, say, a place like Stockholm or like broader Sweden, where we can almost see it as like all of these K29 and the island and the lakefront and your apartment are like these little camps that are all connected by the geography of Stockholm, and we
Mm.
can, you know, ride our subways and our Ubers or whatever to get to these different nodes and experience these different things. And I just wonder if there's a way in which like it's like reimagining what we already have and kind of seeing it through the frame of it already being a village and a tribe
Oh
and
yeah,
already being
yeah.
interconnected. If that can help do like 50% of the work and then also catalyze the other 50% that probably will involve more of a concrete physical restructuring of our entire society.
Yeah, that really resonates. I mean, that really landed for me when I moved from London to Totnes. Yeah, I mentioned this town of just like 10,000 people. Um, like for, I think it's a bit of common process, like common pipeline of like probably back in 2014 or so. I was like, oh, like what wouldn't it be amazing to like live in a big house with all of my friends? And then a few years later, it was like, oh, that maybe that would be a bit too close quarters. Maybe it's like, oh, let's all live in tiny houses on a piece of land. And then in moving to Totnes or being in Totnes for a couple of years, I was like, hang on a minute, like a small town basically is that. A small town basically is you're all living in houses on the same piece of land, but you have the added benefit of there being other people around there too, because it kind of gets
Yeah.
it can get a bit intense and dull if you just have the same five tiny houses of five families,
Yeah.
like just, and that's all that's around for miles and miles. So yeah, the kind of like big house to tiny house to just small town pipeline is is an interesting one, and I think of it actually a very useful progression in a way, as indeed we see, as you very eloquently put it there. It's like we're already there. It's all of the ways in which it's just about kind of reframing or rethinking how we're understanding the places that we live and the connections or relationships between them, rather than everyone thinking, "Oh, must start an eco village, or I
Yeah.
must like escape wherever I am to get to the kind of promised regenerative, alternative hippie promised land or whatever." Like,
Mhm.
um, and then I mean, and another part or angle on this, of course, is that there's so many eco villages and intentional communities fail,
Yeah.
and I think it is part, like this kind of utopian thinking is a big part of that. It's like people think, oh, I just need to get to this place, and then everything's going to be fine. And I think it's John Kabat-Zinn wrote, but what's it called? Wherever you go, there you are, is the
Yeah.
name of the book. And it's like,
Totally.
oh, I'm in the eco village and I'm still me with the same shadows and traumas and causing the same problems as I was, back in London or Stockholm or wherever it might be. So,
Yeah.
but of course, there's a balance, and I still think that I too, ultimately harbor strong desires to be living out of the city, or at least in a part of the city that has really significantly reinvented itself to be much more nature connected and much more community oriented. So there is value in starting these things, or like
Yeah.
growing these like actual alternatives, physical spaces. Um, but yeah, really important for them not to be seen as like a kind of silver bullet, and for us all just to realize that, like, how much is possible, like, yeah, right where we are.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen to all that. I think in a way because of these smaller projects that I'm doing now, I say smaller, they feel quite huge, but they're also smaller relative to the sort of North Star. I feel so satiated already by what is. And so there's actually more of an ability to hold the, protopian or even utopian North Star, because it's not desperately trying to get there. It's more of like,
Mm.
that's just like it's just like a beautiful potential that even if I never get to taste it, like the act of praying into it as a possibility is guiding me to all these amazing people and all these amazing places, to conversations like this with you right now. And
Mm.
so it's not even really important whether one gets there or not. Now I could look at it from more of an ecological standpoint and make different scenarios, but in terms of my personal lived experience, it's like the journey is the destination and the
Mm.
destination is the journey, and the rest is inshallah in God's
Yeah,
hands.
yeah. Like the phrase like village mindset comes to mind of like,
Yeah, that's good.
like even before we're physically living in villages, like to what extent can we adopt that mindset and like cultivate
Yeah.
that same sense of intimacy and coziness and care actually for place. I think that's another attraction for well, for me, and I think for many people, in imagining living in something like that. It's like, oh, wouldn't it be amazing to like really take care of a place? And like,
Yeah.
so we could ask the question, actually, to what extent is that possible? Like right now, like do I need to wait until I'm, at that other place to
Yeah.
start getting to know my neighbors, or to start like making like an impact on the physical spaces that I
Yeah.
inhabit? Yeah.
Yeah, the original lighthouse vision that I wrote about 3 years ago on Medium was about taking churches that are no longer in use because a lot of churches are being abandoned now, and
Mm-hmm.
basically just regenerating churches that are in pre-existing communities as community containers
Mm-hmm.
for a new type of,
Mm-hmm.
a more of a pluralistic spirituality, but it's also grounded in certain principles and ethos. And yeah, when I wrote that, like I was shocked by the response. It seemed to receive a very visceral response of like, yes, like it was
Yeah.
really intense, that feedback that I got from life. And yeah, so there's still something to that feels like it's a much simpler approach than going and building a whole village. But I also just want to plug traditional dream factory that I was just visiting in
Mm-hmm.
Portugal because it's really cool. It's in a small village. And there's a big, beautiful old church, and it's like, a pretty traditional middle class farming town that's gorgeous too. All the buildings are painted beautiful colors. And then they bought an old abandoned chicken factory, an industrial chicken factory that was abandoned, and they are turning these like long, chicken coop into really cool co-working spaces and co-housing, and just sort of regenerating the land. And the local government is like completely on board, and they're super excited about it. And then I think it's an hour train ride right into downtown Lisbon. And so to me, that's really the sweet spot where it's like it's right there, like physically interconnected with an existing community that's bringing in more of that like
Mm-hmm.
traditional kind of amber integral from an integral perspective, like just
Mm-hmm.
more of that kind of family simplicity, grounded quality with a new, exciting sort of metamodern visionary space that's regenerating a place that was already abandoned and was serving no purpose at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And it's right next to a major metropolitan hub.
Mm-hmm.
That to me just feels like super juicy.
And and as mystery would have it, I was speaking to Sam, one of the co-founders of TDF, like just before I got on this call.
Oh, really? Oh,
So,
cool. You
yeah,
should
yeah,
have.
yeah. So,
Sam's great.
yeah, it's I totally agree. They're a really inspiring example of what's possible. And actually, and the book that you were just showing us was written at TDF as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
So when I went to the tribal gathering, I was stayed with Sam, and Sam's in the theme camp with Sam, and got
okay.
to know him really well, and Luna as
Ah,
well. And yeah, they're
awesome.
super super inspiring for me, and also another example of
Uh,
a couple that are romantic couple that are partnering on a project together.
Very cool.
Yeah,
And of course, Sam's background is as a technologist, and
yeah,
so they are also working on. That was actually the main reason I was having a call with him to talk about the closer.earth platform, which is like tech. They are actually, or based on like what they actually need themselves at TDF, they're kind of creating this platform for regenerative villages that any village can use
yeah,
to help them handle, well, first and foremost, just like bookings, kind of Airbnb style, people coming and going, but also events, and like the kind of the really grand vision is to for each regenerative village to have a blockchain based token that can actually allow a kind of exit to community. So for the usually small number of founders that actually like put up the money and bought the land, because often these things happen. You just someone made some money, or someone inherited some money or whatever, and like not
yeah,
everyone can put in equal amounts at the beginning, or like it just, or another scenario is just like the land becomes available and you get like 1 week to bid on it, and so like you don't have time to organize the 100 people. You just have to have one person just dive in and get it. So but yeah, so how do you go from that process of a small number of people having put the money in to then actually yeah, a much larger number of people having an economic interest and stake in the project? So that's actually
yeah,
the kind of like real vision for Closer that probably you heard a little bit about from Sam as well.
yeah.
So yeah, really love what they're doing and how they're thinking about it.
Yeah, super cool. I'm so happy that people like you and him exist because the technology stuff is not my expertise at all, not my passion point. And yeah, I really, it's like I know how essential it is to creating, making these new types of communities really run and function. And it just goes completely over my head, all the crypto, all the Web3 stuff. And so it's so important for me to have people like you in my life, in my orbit that I can source wisdom from.
right, I've never made a film in my life as well. So
Yeah, I got the
I'm
storytelling, the
I'm
marketing, the branding, the
right.
design. Yeah.
I'm delighted to have people of your skill set in my life as well.
Yeah. Cool. Well, is there anything else that wants to be shared on this call?
Um, just to make clear that there's an invitation to anyone listening to join us at the next Futurecraft residency at
Woo.
Fatopia, just south of Paris, 17th to 23rd of February. You can find the details at futurecraft.life on the events page. And then there will be a Futurecraft Together gathering that I'm really hoping you're going to come to, Tucker. It sounds things are looking good in that regard. I think it's the 9th to the 16th of May in Cornwall in southwest England. That is, as I mentioned before, for people that are like have been to a bunch of, spent time at TDF or been to Gathering of the Tribes and are quite familiar with this world, which is probably most of the people listening to this actually. So that details of that will be announced. So best to just sign up to the Futurecraft newsletter if folks are interested in hearing about that. But thank you so much for this opportunity to chat. And I'm really, we kind of set this intention for it to really be like a conversation where we are both able to sort of like share the things that we've been working on. And I'm really delighted how it's turned out in that way. I've certainly learned a lot, and yeah, I'd be delighted to do this again sometime.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much. Just grateful that you exist. Thank you for being you and for all the people that you bring together. I think I can speak on behalf of everyone that they're quite blessed to have you in their lives. So thank you so much. Appreciate you.